this class seems like one where even the guys at the top of it, there are some question marks that come with every single one of them. So, Dane, I wanted to ask you this first off. Who is the consensus top 50 pick, according to your board, and let's even the athletic big board in general, that you're just the most worried about? The guy that you're just like, I just don't know about this player.
I think I'd lean Quentin Johnston here, TCU wide receiver. There's a lot to like about him. If you're going to bet on the traits, he's 6'3", 210 pounds. He has some really appealing parts of his game athletically. At the combine, he jumped. He didn't do anything else. He just jumped. And he knew what he was doing. He knew he was going to test well. 40 and a half in the vert, 11.2 in the broad. And then at his pro day, ran 4.51, which isn't terrible, but we expected 4.4s. And then the 3-cone was 7.31, which is not good at all. It's about the bottom 5% for wide receivers. Cody Mock, our North Dakota State offensive lineman, was a 7.12. And Quentin Johnston was a 7.31, just for comparison purposes there.
Edge rushers, you're looking at sub 7.2, so yes. that's kind of the threshold.
So, and I don't want this to turn into like a DK Metcalf conversation.
That's the first place your mind goes, right?
Right. But they're different as receivers. But with Quentin Johnston, and just focusing on the tape, and this was true going into the testing part of the process. He's a guy that doesn't consistently separate on his own. He's big, he's athletic. You love the stride length. He can make that first guy miss. He tracks the ball really well, but there's too many drops. He doesn't create a ton of separation at the top of the route. So, there's several things about his game that you like, but then also several things that are just instrumental to playing the position at a high level that he doesn't do on a consistent basis. And, the Big 12 not producing receivers, that's part of the conversation. I don't want to, lean too much into that because you don't helmet scout, you don't conference scout, but you also don't ignore that. So, it's just part of the conversation. So with Quentin Johnston, he is a really talented player that doesn't have a clear path that you say, okay, he's going to be this as a rookie, this in year 2. Like there's some development needed and there's some concern there.
How do you feel about Quentin Johnston? Do you agree with a lot of those concerns, Nate?
Yeah, I do. And during the season, I was like, "Oh, this guy's my receiver one. Big. Look at him move all this." And he kind of has.
You are a parody of yourself.
Having said that, I agree with a lot what Dane is saying. He is such a unique prospect. I even struggle with any comparisons I have for him.
Yeah,
like it's just his place. He's a big finesse receiver, but doesn't do the finesse stuff. Like he's not skilled, and that I struggle with that. But I do. He's going to be my answer for a different question that near the end of the show. But I do agree with what Dane is saying. It's like there are so many traits that you love. Like you see the yards after catch that he can create, but then his hand-eye is good. But the thing is, he doesn't ever extend for a throw. Like he bodies a lot of throws. So it's just this weird, body type with play style differences with him. So he's going to be my answer later for a different question where I maybe speak about him a little more positively, but I do agree with a lot of concerns with Dane that this guy during the season, I was like, oh, receiver one. And now he's dropped a little bit for me, even as a size speed truther. That's how concerning is some of those negatives that Dane brought up.
This is one of those where coming to the process as late as I do, you have an idea of what this guy will be, where he's 6'3", he's the kind of prototypical outside receiver compared to a lot of these guys who are a little bit smaller. So I turned on the tape and I watched the Michigan game first. And he had a ton of production in the Michigan game. But after watching that game, I was like, I'm out. Like, even with all that production, like it comes in weird ways. He takes a couple balls, like the shallow cross, he takes it forever. But I watched that game, I'm like, if that's what this guy is every single week, I don't know how I feel about this. And Dane, this may sound crazy, but in the Georgia game, he had one catch. I was more impressed with him in the Georgia game than I was with what he did in the Michigan game, even though he had one catch for 3 yards. After watching that game, I was like, okay, I can get on board with some of the stuff that he's doing. Against Ringo, he was open 3 or 4 times, and Duggan is under duress. They have no shot on offense, and he just doesn't find him. So it's very funny that he had one catch for 3 yards in the national championship game, and that's the game where I came away more impressed than in the huge game he had against Michigan.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, but that Michigan game, that catch and run was the bulk of his production in that
Yeah.
one. And that's what he can do. He can make that first guy miss. It's something for a bigger guy. He does it pretty well.
Yeah.
And that's what's so weird about him, because you think he's this big body guy and you're going to see that type of profile. And then you watch him, and the yak stuff may be the most attractive part of his game. So I was looking at some of the numbers on PFF. There were 140 players in FBS last season who got at least 75 targets. He was 108th in contested catch rate among those 140 players, despite the frame. Yeah. He was third in yak per reception.
Yeah. Well, and I think, if you condense it even more to 50% of targets, I think he was second. So like he was like 8.9 yak.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
crazy. Like it's for a guy that big, and that three cone too. Like he's not a guy that has wiggle. He's not necessarily shifty, but he does know how to sidestep. He has really good instincts for put the ball away, and then understanding his surroundings, and then making something happen and utilizing those different angles. So yeah, he's a guy that's really unique in what he offers. Like there's not a really great comparison that, like Nate, like you said, like that you could instantly come up with. And that's part of why, he worries me. I still like him as a top 50 guy, but he does give me a little bit of pause, a little bit of worry there.
He's a big body underneath receiver.
Yeah.
Like which is so you get him on, you have to get him on the move, which is not, if I get a big receiver, I want to body him up and post him up on the outside. He's a guy that you want on the move. I'm not comparing, this is not a one-to-one comparison, but more like Michael Pittman in the sense where he's a big body guy that you want him running. You want him using that big body and athletic traits to get moving. But Pittman's it's a little different than that, but just saying that type of play style a little bit.
I have a question about a comp, and I want to see what you think about this, Dane, because you've watched these guys and have way more of a sense of what they were as prospects. But in terms of the speed, the jumps being very good, and him being more of a yak merchant in college than really anything else, how does his profile compare to a guy like Brandon Ayuk when he was coming out of Colorado?
Okay, interesting. I mean, because Ayuk, he was so long that even though he wasn't the tallest receiver, he was, because he was so long. And I mean, his big game, the thing about his game was yak, and so that's the whole reason he went in the first round.
Slants and glances,
exactly,
all day.
And so I can understand why you come to that conclusion, because that's the strength of Quentin Johnston, is get the ball in his hands. Whether he loves to run curls, but let him run some slants, let him get those crossers, let him give him a little bit of a runway. So I could see why you would come up with that name.
They both ran their 40-inch vertical for both of them. 128 for Ayuk in the broad, 134 for Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston has 33 and 5/8 inch arms. Brandon Ayuk was at 33 and a half, and they both ran 4.5 in the 40.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I think that
and a little loose on the route running.
Right.
But Brandon Ayuk has gotten much better at that.
Much better.
So it was
perfect
funny.
landing spot.
Right.
that was my first thought when I watched him, and I did not plan on having Brandon Ayuk come into my head when we were talking about a 6'3" receiver.
That's
as good as I've
heard. Yeah, I know.
If we're naming like the top 3 concerns for Quentin Johnston, the drops are on there. That's one of those things where he needs to get better. He had more drops than touchdown catches this year. It's something that he needs to get better at. And I think part of it is because he does want to create after the catch, that he will either let the ball into his body because he's looking, just let it get it to me, and then I'm going to run and things like that. So he does need to get better as a finisher. But no, I like that comparison. That's as good as I've heard.
Yeah, I agree. He's always looking right before the ball gets there. He always glances to look around, which
makes a lot of guys miss because of that.
He does exactly.
The Kansas game, he had one of those. Several different games where it reminds me of a play weirdly Denario Alexander made in college against Kansas State. I don't know why that sticks out to me, but it was a game I was covering where he just kind of turned on a dime, and he was 6'5". So watching Quentin Johnston at 6'3" do some of that stuff, I was impressed by that, even though the change of direction numbers are awful. All right, Nate, who's your guy for this?
Man, I've gone back for that. I got 2
top 50 player you're the most worried about as we revisit as we talked for 10 minutes before getting to yours.
I know that was great. No, I'm glad we got QJ out of the way too. It's Jalin Hyatt for me from Tennessee, and this is I appreciate some parts of his game. I appreciate the juice that he brings, the long speed. The kind of just smooth athlete. I do think he has good hands and ball eye skills, like being able to track the ball over his shoulder and adjust and all those. 176 pounds, though. I see the comparisons to Will Fuller that people have thrown around. I thought Will Fuller at Notre Dame was so much more explosive with the ball in his hands, was able to more creative with the ball in his hands and played bigger. I think Hyatt plays to his size, and as far as frame, he is a little taller. But I just think this is a straight line burner with good hands that it's kind of gotten overrated because of his production. I feel like this is a guy that maybe just the replacement level for this type of player is higher, where you can find him in the middle rounds as opposed to someone that you have to sacrifice a top 40 pick on or a 45 pick on. Again, this is what's always tough, especially when you're watching the Tennessee offense or any offense that's like this. A lot of college offenses, does he have the potential for route running? Because even if they only show that they run 3 routes, with Hyatt, it was a lot of slot fades, a lot of seams, straight down.
Slot
just go.
fades from outside the numbers.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Slot fades where he'd be on the outside
Yeah.
of the pros. And so that's where I don't want to damn him and say like, oh, he'll never be a good route runner. Like it's just that he hasn't had the opportunity to show it. But the fact that he needed to be in the slot so much, and again, that's part of the offense, but press, he has issues with any physical defenders, even when he got collision at the second level. I did think his balance was okay, but he just doesn't have that strength. He's just naturally not a strong bodied guy. I do think he's useful. I just hesitate where he's being kind of slotted at this point in time. So that's where my worries are, is that I think he'll be a fine player, but I think people are expecting more out of him and what the growth is. But I'm like, this is kind of what I think he's going to be. He's a vertical burner with good hand eye. But if you're asking for anything more from him, it's little iffy, because I just think even underneath to create yards after the catch, I just don't see that creativity. He's a splitter. He gets the ball and gets north, which isn't bad, but at that tiny of size, that means he's going down right away in the NFL. Like he gets hit, he's going down. So that's where my concerns kind of lay with him.
That Tennessee offense is an extension of what Baylor used to do. And so you have this offense where it's super, super wide split. So even if you're the slot receiver, you're further outside than most outside receivers are going to be. So you see him catching a lot of his long touchdowns outside the numbers, but it starts from an off the line alignment where he doesn't have to deal with any physicality and he's got free releases. He's running right by people. So Dane, my question for you is, how do you even do this? When you're watching this guy in this sort of offense and you're trying to compare what he does to what a true outside receiver working against a ton of press coverage does, I mean, how do you project somebody who had this specific of a role and this specific of an offense to an NFL role when we're considering him as a top 25 pick?
And we've never seen, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've never seen a wide receiver from that Art Briles offense really make it at the NFL level.
It's Corey Coleman horror stories.
Right, exactly.
That's number one. Yep.
And so, that obviously is part of this conversation that it's going to be working against Jalin Hyatt. And so it's a lot of projection involved with him. And I think that for me, I'm putting together my final top 100 for the draft guide right now. And he came in right around like 30 for me. And the big reason why I'm optimistic about him is because I think he's exceptional in 2 areas. And Nate touched on this, the vertical speed and the ball skills. I think he's, his ability to, even with these deep passes, he's catching the ball away from his body. Like he's not
all the time.
Well, he plucked it. Yep.
Very, very confident with his ball skills. And so when you have those 2 things, you could be a weapon. And so Nate, how would you compare him to Christian Watson? Was a little bigger, but raw route runner, vertical speed, right. How do you think there's some similarities there between those 2 players?
As a receiver, yes. As far as like what their routes strengths are and all that, right. But like as far as like playmaking and ball in the hands, like it's Watson. Just no, that's actually not a terrible comparison.
He outweighs
but Watson just I was just saying Watson's so big.
Size is a big difference, no question.
Yeah, he gets the ball, and that's how he's able to split. And that's where the concern is as soon as he catches the ball, because he's not going to be able to just take the top. You're not spending a top 35 pick on a guy. You could. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, but just just go.
You wouldn't do this, but I think other people would.
Teams would. But it's my comfort level for him. It's like once we're sitting back half of the second round, okay, all right, now we can start talking about him. But it's like really in that I know I'm splitting hairs here with this, but this is kind of how this receiving class is
Yeah.
that I just think that as soon as that ball is in his hands, I just don't see the potential there. And I'm not saying that there's going to be a use for him. Like he's going to stick just because of that, what we're talking about, the hand eye, and just be able to take the top off the defense. It's just like, what else you got? And that's where my concerns come from, is that any underneath stuff, I'd be a little worried about targeting him, because I could just see him trying to run mesh on a crosser and he just gets blown the F up as he's trying to get yards with the ball in his hands.
Well, and he's a very specific role player.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of what he offers. And so, and that's where the challenges are from our point of view doing this.
Right.
On the outside, we're not scouting for a specific scheme or,
love him with the Chargers. Like he would be
I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Exactly.
I just
love him
couldn't
with the
stop
Chargers.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
So, and that's exactly.
It's
so
tough.
it's a tough conversation when, he's going to be a specific role, and he'll be a top 50 guy for one team and not even on the board for another team, because he just won't fit what they do.